The hunters were getting closer. The scared girl grabbed the first person she saw, who was very pale, pretty, and looked dangerous. "Please, help me!" she breathed out. What she didn't know was that the man she'd just asked for help from was the vampire king, and he had been waiting hundreds of years for a queen. The fancy glass light hanging over the large wooden dining table made shadows dance across the walls as Ella Matthews pushed her food, roast beef, around her plate without eating it. Her stepmother, Victoria, sat at the head of the table like a queen in charge, tapping her perfect fingernails against her wine glass very carefully. "Put down that fork, Ella." Victoria's voice cut through the quiet like a sharp knife. "We have important things to talk about." Ella's stomach squeezed tight. Nothing good ever came from Victoria's important things. She set down her knife and fork and folded her hands in her lap, trying to look smaller than she already felt. "Lord Vaughan has asked to marry you," Victoria announced, her lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her cold blue eyes. "The wedding will happen next month." The words hit Ella like a hard punch. Lord Vaughan, the man who owned half the town and treated his workers very badly. She'd seen the bruises on his house workers' arms, heard the secret stories of girls who disappeared from his big house. "No!" The word escaped before Ella could stop it. Victoria's smile disappeared. "Excuse me?" Ella's hand shook as she found her voice. "I said, no, I won't marry him. He's mean and terrible." Victoria laughed, the sound sharp and unpleasant. "Child, you don't know what terrible looks like. Lord Vaughan is rich, powerful, and willing to ignore your bad family history. Your father left us with a lot of debt before he died. This marriage will make sure our family has a high place in our town." "I don't care about our town's place." Ella stood up so fast her chair scraped on the wooden floor. "I won't be sold like an animal to pay for your gambling debts." The slap came fast and hard, snapping Ella's head to the side. Her cheeks stung as Victoria leaned forward, her voice becoming a poisonous whisper. "Your life belongs to me, girl. Every breath you take, every bite of food you eat, every piece of clothing on your back, it all comes from me being kind. You will marry Lord Vaughan, or you'll find yourself on the streets with nothing but the old clothes you're wearing." Ella touched her stinging cheek, tears making her sight blurry. "My father would never have wanted this." "Your father was a weak fool who left me to clean up his messes," she hissed. "But you're going to fix this family's money problems. Whether you like it or not, the news about your engagement will be announced tomorrow." That night, Ella lay in her small bed, staring at the water stains on her ceiling. Victoria had locked her in her room, a usual punishment, but tonight felt different. Final. In a month, she'd be Mrs. Vaughan, stuck in a mansion with a man who collected pretty things and broke them for fun. The old oak tree outside her window creaked in the autumn wind, its branches scraping against the glass like bony fingers. Ella had climbed that tree 1,000 times as a child, back when her father was alive and laughter still filled these halls. She made her decision. Moving quietly, Ella pulled on her darkest clothes and stuffed a few important things into a small bag. Her mother's silver necklace, the last letter from her father, and the $23 she'd hidden beneath her mattress. It wasn't a lot, but it was everything she had. The window opened with barely a sound. Ella swung her legs over the edge and found her usual places to grip on the oak's rough trunk. Years of practice made her climb down fast and quiet. Her bare feet hit the wet grass and she ran. The forest behind their property went on for miles, thick with tall pine trees that blocked out the moonlight. She crashed through the bushes and small trees, branches catching at her clothes and hair. Behind her, she could hear shouting. Victoria must have found her empty room. "Find her!" Victoria's voice carried through the night air. "She can't have gone far." Ella's lungs burned as she ran deeper into the woods, her bare feet bleeding from roots and stones. The sounds of people chasing her grew closer. Flashlight beams swept through the trees like searching eyes. She stumbled into a small open space where moonlight looked like silver water. That's when she saw him. He stood perfectly still beside a huge elm tree, as if he'd been waiting for her. Tall and thin, with dark hair that fell across his forehead, He wore a long black coat that seemed to soak up the moonlight. But it was his eyes that stopped her completely, pale silver, ancient, and definitely not human. Lost, little one? His voice was smooth and gentle with just a hint of an accent she couldn't figure out. They're hunting you, he noticed, tipping his head as the distant shouts grew louder. What bad thing did you do to make them look so hard? I ran away. The words rushed out of her. My stepmother wants to force me to marry a terrible man. Ah. He stepped closer, and Ellis smelled winter nights and something else, something dark and metallic. And what would you do to avoid this fate? Anything, she whispered, and truly meant it. His smile showed teeth that were a little too sharp. Anything. How wonderfully complete. He held out one pale hand toward her. I can offer you escape, little rabbit. Freedom from those who would lock you up. But the price, his smile got wider, the price is everything. I don't understand. Marry me, he said simply, tonight, here in this sacred small forest under the watching moon. Become mine and you will never have to obey anyone again. Ella's heart pounded against her ribs. This stranger was dangerous. Every part of her told her that. But behind her, flashlights moved closer, and she could hear Victoria's voice promising money for her capture. I don't even know your name. Lucian, he said, as if the name itself held power. And you are Ella. Ella. The way he said it made it sound like a special promise. What will it be, sweet Ella? A cage or a crown? The hunters were almost upon them. In minutes, they'd drag her back to Victoria, back to Lord Vaughan, back to a life of working for others and sadness. Yes, she breathed. Lucian's eyes flashed with something wild and hungry. He pulled a silver knife from his coat, its blade shining with a strange light. Blood calls to blood, he whispered, cutting the knife across his palm. Dark liquid oozed out, looking black in the moonlight. Your hand. Ella held out her shaking hand. The blade stung as it cut her skin, but she didn't move. Their palms pressed together, blood mixing as power sparked through the air like lightning. By blood and moon, by shadow and fire, Lucian's voice had become strange, echoing with power that made the trees themselves seem to bend. Fire rushed through Ella's veins. What have you done to me? She gasped. Lucian's smile was scary and beautiful. I've made you mine, little queen. And now, he wrapped his arms around her as shadows rose from the forest floor, like living things. The darkness swallowed them both, and Ella's last thought before she passed out was that she traded one prison for another. But at least this one came with a crown. Ella's awareness came back slowly, like floating up from the bottom of a deep, dark lake. Her body felt weird, lighter somehow, but buzzing with an energy she'd never felt before. The smell that filled her nose wasn't the dirt and wetness of the forest, but something ancient and magical, like special burning herbs mixed with starlight. Her eyes fluttered open to see a ceiling so amazing it took her breath away. Detailed stone arches went high overhead, carved with symbols that seemed to move and dance in the edges of her vision. Gothic pillars twisted upward like frozen waterfalls, and between them hung huge cloths that showed scenes of battles between creatures that were definitely not human. Ella sat up slowly, her head spinning. She lay on a bed big enough for 5 people, covered in dark blue silk that felt like liquid under her fingers. The mattress was so soft she might have been floating on a cloud, and the pillows were stuffed with something much softer than goose feathers. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice echoing in the huge room. The room around her went against everything she thought she knew about buildings. The walls curved in impossible ways, as if carved from the inside of a massive, sparkling rock. Crystal formations stuck out from the stone, shining with their own inner light, not electric, but something much older. Through tall, narrow windows, she could see not sky, but more stone formations stretching into a shadowy distance. This wasn't just underground. This was somewhere else entirely. A door she hadn't noticed before, which looked like part of the wall until it moved, slid open quietly and smoothly. Lucian entered. but he looked different now. Gone was the mysterious stranger in a simple black coat. Instead, he wore clothes that screamed of royalty and ancient power. A fitted black velvet jacket with silver threads that caught the crystal light, leather pants that looked like they'd been made by expert sewers, and boots that made no sound against the stone floor. But it was his presence that had changed the most. In the forest, he'd been dangerous. Here, he was absolutely deadly, power coming off him like heat from a furnace. "You're awake," he said, and his voice carried the weight of hundreds of years. "Good, we have much to discuss." "Lucian," Ella's voice cracked, "what is this place? What happened to me?" He moved closer, and she noticed things she'd missed in the moonlight forest. His skin was too pale, too perfect, without a single flaw or mark. His movements were too smooth, like a hunter who'd never known anything but total certainty. And his eyes, those silver eyes, held depths that spoke of thousands of years, not just a few decades. "Welcome to Umberleth," he said, sitting in a chair that seemed to have been carved from a single piece of black pearl. "The realm beneath my kingdom." "Kingdom?" Ella's laugh came out weak and strained. "You're joking." "I assure you I am not." Lucian's face remained completely serious. "I am Lucian Nightborn, king of the Umberleth Coven, lord of the Blood Throne, and ruler of all vampires who live beneath the human world." The words hit her like physical blows. "Vampires? You're saying you're a vampire?" "I am saying I am the vampire, the first of my kind to bring the separate groups together under one crown, the first to create a civilization that covers whole areas beneath your human feet." His silver eyes never left her face. "And as of last night, you are my queen." Ella's hand flew to her throat, checking for bite marks that weren't there. "But I don't feel." "You are still mortal," Lucian assured her. "The blood promise we share joins us as husband and wife, but it does not change your main nature. That would require a completely different ceremony." Relief and fear fought in her chest. She was alive, but she was trapped in an underground kingdom with a vampire king who claimed she was her wife. The cut on her palm from their ritual had healed completely, leaving only a thin silver scar that shined like moonlight. "I want to go home," she whispered. "This is your home now." Lucian rose from his chair with that strange grace. "And it is time you met your subjects." Before Ella could argue, he was beside her, offering his arm with old-fashioned manners. His touch sent sparks racing through her body, the same fire she'd felt when their blood mixed. "I'm not dressed for meeting anyone," she said, looking down at her messy escape clothes. With a wave of his hand, her outfit changed. Her torn jeans and dirty sweater became an elegant gown of deep emerald green. The fabric flowed around her like water. Her tangled reddish-brown hair arranged itself into a complicated style fit for a medieval court, held in place by a small silver crown that felt warm against her skin. "How did you—" "Magic," Lucian said simply. "One of many gifts you will learn about. Now come." They walked through hallways that seemed to have been carved by artists rather than builders. Every surface was decorated with impossible beauty. Paintings on the walls that moved when she wasn't looking right at them, statues that seemed to breathe, floors decorated with metals that didn't exist in the human world. The throne room they entered took her breath away. The ceiling went so high it disappeared into shadow, held up by columns carved to look like massive tree trunks. At the far end, two thrones sat on a raised platform, one of black stone that seemed to soak up light, the other of white marble that glowed with inner light. But it was the assembled crowd that made Ella's step slow. Dozens of pale, beautiful creatures filled the space, all of them turning to stare as she entered. Their eyes reflected the crystal light like cats, and when they smiled, she glimpsed fangs that left no doubt about what they were. The vampires wore clothing from different times, some in modern clothes, others in outfits that belonged in museums. All of them gave off the same dangerous elegance as Lucian, but their expressions ranged from curiosity to barely hidden unfriendliness. "My lords and ladies," Lucian's voice carried easily through the vast space, "I present to you Queen Ella, my bonded wife and your sovereign."
The reaction was immediate and loud. Gasps echoed off the stone walls, followed by a rising wave of whispers. A mortal queen? Has he lost his mind? She smells like prey. This is crazy. One vampire near the front, a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a Renaissance painting, spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. A fragile mortal girl? My lord, surely you just... Lucian's eyes flashed with something dangerous. I do not just Lady Evangeline, and I suggest you remember who you speak to. But the damage had been done. Ella could feel their stares like physical weight, could smell their hunger like a living thing. As Lucian led her toward the thrones, Ella's newly sharp senses caught pieces of whispered conversations. She won't last a month. Such a waste of perfectly good blood. The king has finally gone crazy. Sitting on the white marble throne felt like accepting a death sentence. The stone was warm beneath her, pulsing with some kind of life force, but it did nothing to ease the cold fear spreading through her chest. She'd escaped Victoria's cage only to find herself in another, this one filled with monsters who saw her as either something interesting or a meal. As the vampire court continued to whisper and stare, Ella realized very clearly that marrying a vampire king might have been the worst decision of her very short life. The next evening, Ella found herself alone in the huge rooms that were supposed to be hers. Lucian had been called away to important council business, leaving her with only unclear warnings about staying in the royal part of the palace and avoiding certain areas. But curiosity had always been her weakness. The hallways of Umberleth seemed to change when no one was watching. Passages that had been there moments before would disappear, replaced by new doorways that led to rooms filled with incredible wonders. Ella discovered libraries with books that wrote themselves, gardens where flowers bloomed in eternal moonlight, and art galleries filled with paintings whose eyes followed her movement. She'd been walking for what felt like hours when she heard voices echoing from behind a partly open door. The sound of her own name made her stop completely. Cannot be allowed to continue. The voice was sharp, rich-sounding, filled with barely controlled anger. A mortal queen will be the end of us all. Ella crept closer, pressing herself against the cold stone wall. Lord Malachar speaks truly, another voice agreed, this one female and full of disrespect. Our bloodlines have remained pure for thousands of years. Are we to watch them be spoiled by human weakness? The girl is pretty enough, a third voice thought aloud, but she lacks the strength to rule. The first time she faces a real challenge, she'll crumble like dust. Ella's blood ran cold as she realized she was listening to Lucian's inner council, the vampires who helped him govern this underground realm, and they were discussing how to kill her. Perhaps an accident, Lord Malachar continued thoughtfully, a fall from a great height. So tragic when humans forget their limitations. Or she could simply disappear, the female voice suggested with cruel fun. The underground tunnels are vast and full of hungry things.
Even a vampire king cannot guard his pet every moment. Enough! Lucian's voice cut through the planning like a blade through silk, and Ella heard the scrape of chairs as the council members stood. You forget yourselves, my lords. Lord Malachar's tone turned carefully respectful, but the underlying hostility remained. We speak only out of concern for the realm. Surely you see the danger. I see only subjects who question their king's judgment. Ice seemed to freeze in Lucian's words, and the temperature in the corridor seemed to drop a lot. The blood vow is sacred. It cannot be undone by political convenience or your petty prejudices. Petty? Lady Evangeline's voice rose higher. My lord, with respect, you risk everything we have built. The human world grows suspicious of our kind. Their technology gets better every day. We need unity, not division, not some weak human girl playing at being queen. Ella winced as if she'd been slapped. Ella is my chosen queen, Lucian said, and his voice carried the weight of total authority. Any who threaten her threaten the crown itself. I trust I make myself clear. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Of course, my lord, Lord Malachar finally said, but his tone promised nothing. We serve at your pleasure.
See that you remember that. Ella hurried away from the door, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain the vampires would hear it. She'd suspected the court was unfriendly, but hearing them casually discuss her murder made everything terrifyingly real. Lost in thought, she didn't notice the figure waiting in the shadows until a musical voice spoke behind her. My, what do we have here? Ella spun around to find herself face to face with the most beautiful woman she'd ever seen. The vampire, for she was clearly that, had super blonde hair that fell in perfect waves to her waist, skin like fresh snow, and eyes the color of winter ice. She wore a gown that looked like it had been made from liquid silver, and when she smiled, her fangs gleamed like pearls. You must be the famous mortal queen, the woman continued, walking around Ella with dangerous grace. I am Seraphine Blackthorn, Lady of the Northern Territories, and former confidant of our dear king. The way she said confidant left no doubt about her past relationship with Lucien. It's nice to meet you, Ella managed, though every instinct screamed at her to run. Oh, sweet child. Seraphine's laugh was like broken glass wrapped in honey. There's nothing nice about this meeting at all. She stepped closer, and Ella caught the scent of winter roses and something else, something that smelled like old blood. I don't understand. Don't you? Seraphine tilted her head with pretend curiosity. You've stumbled into a world where you don't belong, little lamb, where your very presence threatens the natural order, where every breath you take is a gift that can be taken away at any moment. Ella's mouth went dry. Are you threatening me? Threatening? She pressed her hand to her chest in exaggerated shock. Don't even think it. I'm simply teaching you about your situation. She leaned in close, her breath cold against her ear. You see, darling, Lucien has always had a weakness for lost things. He picks them up, keeps them for a while, then gets bored and throws them away. The only question is whether you'll survive long enough for him to tire of you naturally, or if his court will grow impatient and take matters into their own hands. Lucien wouldn't let anything happen to me, would he? Seraphine's smile turned razor sharp. Tell me, little queen, where is your devoted husband now? Why are you wandering these halls alone, unprotected, while he tends to more important matters? The words hit home because they echoed her own fears. She was alone, unprotected, surrounded by creatures who saw her as either a threat or a snack. You know what? I think, she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more danger than any shout. I think you're beginning to understand that you've traded one cage for another. At least your stepmother was human. At least her threats were honest. She straightened, smoothing down her perfect hair. Run along now, little lamb. Try not to get lost in the dark. There are so many hungry things lurking in the shadows. With that, Seraphine glided away, her silver gown trailing behind her like liquid moonlight. Ella stood alone in the corridor, trembling. The beautiful vampire's words echoed in her mind, mixing with the council's casual discussion of her death. Every shadow seemed to hide enemies. Every sound could mean her doom. She thought marrying Lucien would give her freedom, but now she saw the truth clearly. She was trapped in a world where she didn't belong, surrounded by immortal predators who wanted her gone. And the worst part was that she was beginning to suspect that some of them might be right. Maybe she really didn't belong here. Maybe she was going to die in this beautiful underground hell. And no one in the human world would ever know what happened to the girl who'd run away into the forest on a desperate autumn night. The next few days passed in a strange rhythm of fear and amazement. Ella would spend her mornings exploring the safer areas of the palace, marveling at rooms filled with impossible beauty, only to go back to her rooms by afternoon when the unfriendly stares of the vampire court became too much to handle. It was during one of these times alone that Lucien appeared at her door, carrying an ornate wooden box and wearing an expression she'd never seen before, something almost unsure. May I come in? He asked, and the politeness in his voice surprised her. Ella nodded, stepping aside to let him enter. He set the box on the marble table near the windows and opened it to reveal dozens of small glass bottles filled with liquids of every color imaginable. "What is it?" she asked, curiosity overcoming her tiredness. "Vampire manners," Lucian said, and there was something almost shy about his smile. "If you're to survive in this court, you need to understand our ways. These," he pointed to the bottles, "essence samples. Each one represents a different vampire family, their bloodline signature. In formal situations, you'll need to identify them by smell alone. You want to teach me? I want to protect you." The honesty in his voice made her chest tighten. "My counsel made their feelings clear yesterday. I won't always be there to shield you from their games." For the next hour, Lucian patiently guided her through the complex world of vampire politics. House Blackthorn smelled like winter roses and old paper. House Ravencrest carried hints of thunderstorms and copper. House Nightshade bore the scent of jasmine mixed with something that reminded her unpleasantly of graveyards. "This is impossible," Elia said, after failing to identify House Grimwald's essence for the third time. "How am I supposed to remember all of this?" "You have vampire blood in you now," Lucian reminded her. "Not enough to change you, but sufficient to heighten your senses. Trust your instincts." She tried again, closing her eyes and breathing in the strange smell. This time, instead of trying to put it into a group, she let the smell tell her a story. Ancient oak trees, leather-bound books, the metallic taste of old coins. "Wealth," she said suddenly. "Old money there. Merchants." Lucian's smile was radiant. "House Grimwald controls most of our trade networks with the surface world. Brilliant." The praise shouldn't have made her feel so good, but something about his real pride in her small success made her feel less like a prisoner and more like a student, a partner even. That evening, as Ella prepared for bed, she heard the soft scrape of stone against stone. She turned to find a section of her chamber wall sliding aside, revealing a hidden passage. Lucian emerged from the darkness, and she realized with a start that he was armed. An ancient sword at his hip, throwing knives strapped to his forearms. "What are you doing?" she asked, standing guard. He settled into a chair she was sure hadn't been there moments before, positioning himself where he could see both the main door and the secret entrance. "Sleep, Ella. I'll watch over you." "You don't need to." "I do." His silver eyes met hers in the crystal light. "There have been incidents. Servants found dead in hallways they had no business entering. Messages carved into walls with claws. Someone is testing the limits of my protection." The casual way he discussed murder attempts made her blood run cold, but there was something comforting about his presence. For the first time since arriving in Umberleth, she felt truly safe. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why did you really choose me? In the forest, you could have just helped me escape. Why marriage?" Lucian was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Do you know what it's like to be surrounded by people who want things from you? Power, favor, eternal life?"
Always something, but never just you. He leaned back in his chair, and for a moment the crown seemed to weigh heavily on his head. "You ran into that forest asking for nothing but freedom. No plans, no secret goal, just honest desperation." "That's not entirely true," Ella admitted. "I wanted escape. I wanted someone else to solve my problems. And I wanted someone who didn't see a king when they looked at me. Just a man." His smile was sad and beautiful. "We both got what we wished for, didn't we? The question is whether we can live with the consequences." As Ella drifted off to sleep, she was very aware of Lucian's presence in the shadows, a protector against the dark. For the first time since their blood promise, she found herself wondering what it might be like if she'd chosen this marriage freely, without desperation driving her decision. Far above in the human world, Victoria Matthews dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief as another well-meaning neighbor offered comfort. "Such a tragedy," Mrs. Henderson said sympathetically. "A young girl lost in those dangerous woods." "The search parties have been out for days," Victoria said with
perfectly acted sadness. "But you know how vast those forests are. So many places a frightened child could fall. Or worse." She let her voice break convincingly. What the neighbors didn't know was that Victoria had called off the search after the first night, not because she'd given up hope, but because she'd received a message that made continuing pointless. A message written in blood on her bedroom mirror. "The debt is paid. The girl is ours now." Seraphine had kept her word. Ella was gone, delivered to the vampire courts as promised. Soon, very soon, the little brat would be dead, and Victoria would be free to marry Lord Vaughan herself, claiming the girl's inheritance as her sad guardian. In the depths of Umberleth, Seraphine smiled as she watched her carefully chosen plotters gather in an abandoned section of the palace. Lord Malachar, Lady Evangeline, and a dozen others who'd grown tired of Lucian's increasingly unpredictable rule. "The mortal queen grows stronger," she told them, though it wasn't entirely true. "She influences the king, makes him weak. Soon he'll choose her over us completely." "What do you propose?" Lord Malachar asked. "Revolution," Seraphine said simply. "Remove the king, eliminate the mortal threat, and restore proper order to our realm." Her ice-blue eyes glittered with ambition, with me on the throne naturally. "And if Lucian discovers our plans?" Seraphine's smile turned dangerous. "Then we speed up our timeline. Sometimes, to save a kingdom, one must be willing to burn it down first." 3 weeks had passed since Ella's arrival in Umberleth, and tonight marked her first official appearance at a royal feast. The great dining hall stretched before her like a church built just for too much of everything. Crystal lights hanging from the ceiling cast rainbow patterns across walls carved from living stone, and the massive table could have seated 50 people easily. Ella sat at Lucian's right hand, wearing a gown of midnight blue that made her reddish-brown hair glow like fire in the crystal light. The vampire lords and ladies filled the remaining seats, their pale faces beautiful and terrible in the flickering light. The feast itself was a study in strange, otherworldly elegance. Cups filled with what looked like liquid rubies. Blood, Ella had learned, though from willing donors in the human world who were paid well for their contribution. Delicate pastries that sparkled with edible gold, fruits that grew only in the eternal twilight of the underground gardens. Ella picked at her food nervously, very aware of the unfriendly stares directed her way. Conversations stopped when she tried to join them, only to start back up again in languages she didn't recognize the moment she looked away. "You're doing well," Lucian murmured beside her, his hand briefly covering hers. "They'll warm to you eventually." But even as he spoke, Ella caught Lady Evangeline whispering to her dinner companion while shooting poisonous looks in her direction. The words "mortal contamination" drifted across the table, followed by poorly concealed laughter. It was then that Seraphine rose from her seat near the center of the table, raising her goblet in what appeared to be a toast. "My lords and ladies, I propose we honor our new queen with a story of fate and destiny." Her winter blue eyes found Ella's across the table, and her smile was sharp as broken glass. After all, some might say her arrival here was preordained. The way she emphasized the word made Ella's stomach squeeze with worry. "Once upon a time," Seraphine continued, beginning to walk around the table like a predator circling prey, "there was a mortal woman drowning in debt and desperation. A woman who would do anything, absolutely anything, to secure her family's future." Ella's blood turned to ice. Seraphine couldn't possibly be talking about. "This woman reached out to our realm, begging for assistance. She offered a trade, something precious in exchange for gold and power. The trade was accepted, of course. We are nothing if not accommodating to mortal needs." "Seraphine," Lucian's voice carried a warning, but the blonde vampire merely smiled and continued her circuit at the table. "The woman got her gold naturally, enough to live in luxury for the rest of her days. And we received exactly what was promised." She paused directly behind Ella's chair, her cold breath tickling the back of Ella's neck. "Isn't fate fascinating how all the pieces fall into place exactly as planned?" The feast continued around them, but Ella barely heard the conversations or tasted her food. Seraphine's words echoed in her mind, each one a nail in the coffin of her growing suspicion. Her stepmother's sudden confidence after Ella's disappearance, the way Victoria had called off the search so quickly, the blood message on the mirror that Ella couldn't possibly know about but somehow sensed was real. As soon as the evening ended and Lucian was pulled away by urgent court business, Ella made her excuses and slipped away from the royal wing. She had to know the truth, even if it destroyed her. The palace seemed darker tonight, shadows stretching longer and deeper than usual. Ella moved through hallways she was learning to navigate, following the pull of instinct and the faint sound of voices echoing from somewhere below. She discovered a spiral staircase she'd never noticed before, carved directly into the living rock. Each step took her deeper underground until she emerged into a chamber lit by floating balls of pale green light. The room was clearly ancient, with symbols carved into every surface that seemed to twist and shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. Seraphine stood at the center of the chamber beside an altar made of black stone. The surface was stained with something dark that definitely wasn't wine. Around her gathered the plotters she'd seen before, Lord Malachar, Lady Evangeline, and a dozen others who'd grown tired of Lucian's increasingly unpredictable rule. The mortal queen grows stronger, she told them, though it wasn't entirely true. She influences the king, makes him weak. Soon he'll choose her over us completely. What do you propose? Lord Malachar asked. Revolution, Seraphine said simply. Remove the king, eliminate the mortal threat, and restore proper order to our realm. Her ice-blue eyes glittered with ambition. With me on the throne naturally. And if Lucian discovers our plans? Seraphine's smile turned dangerous. Then we speed up our timeline. Sometimes, to save a kingdom, one must be willing to burn it down first. Oh, she will, Seraphine promised, her eyes glowing with hateful excitement. I've seen to that. Tomorrow night, during the new moon, when Lucian's power is at its weakest, our little mortal queen will suffer a most tragic accident. And when she breathes her last, the king of vampires will fall with her. Ella pressed her hand over her mouth to stop a sob. Everything, her escape, her marriage, even her growing feelings for Lucian, had been controlled. She wasn't a queen. She was a weapon carefully placed and perfectly positioned to destroy the man she was beginning to love. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. Victoria hadn't just sold her to get a comfortable future.
She'd sold her as a sacrifice, knowing full well that Ella would die in this underground realm. Forcing herself to move quietly, Ella crept back up the spiral staircase, her mind spinning. She had to warn Lucian, had to tell him about the plan. But even as the thought formed, doubt crept in. How could she explain that she'd been listening in on his enemies? How could she prove that she wasn't part of the plot herself? Worst of all, how could she tell him that their marriage, the thing that had begun to feel real and important, was built on lies and manipulation from the very beginning? Back in her chambers, Ella sat on her bed and wept silent tears. She was trapped between betrayers on all sides. And tomorrow night, if Seraphine's plan succeeded, both she and Lucian would pay the ultimate price for Victoria's greed. The question was, could she find a way to save them both? Or was she destined to be nothing more than the perfect weapon that would destroy the man she was falling in love with? Dawn was breaking in the human world above when Ella finally made her decision. She couldn't tell Lucian about the plan. Not yet. If she revealed what she'd overheard, Seraphine would simply speed up her timeline or find another way to strike. But she could try to gather proof. Something solid that would expose the traitors for what they truly were. The palace gardens had become her safe place over the past weeks, the only place where she felt truly at peace. Here, beneath the eternal twilight sky of Umberleth, flowers bloomed that existed nowhere in the human world. Moon blossoms that glowed with inner light, shadow roses that whispered secrets to the wind, crystal lilies that chimed like bells when the breeze touched their petals. Ella walked the winding paths, trying to calm her racing thoughts and plan her next move. She could search Seraphine's rooms for evidence of the blood pact with Victoria,
Or perhaps confront Lord Malachar directly. He seemed the weakest link in the conspiracy. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice the shadows moving until it was too late. They emerged from behind the towering moon blossom trees like liquid darkness given form. Vampires dressed in black leather and moving with deadly silence. Ella opened her mouth to scream, but something struck the back of her head and consciousness fled like a startled bird. When she awoke, pain stabbed through her skull like lightning. She was tied to a chair in what appeared to be a cavern deep beneath even Umberleth's lowest levels. Water dripped from the stone formations, stalactites, on the ceiling, and the only light came from torches that cast dancing shadows on the rough stone walls. Seraphine stood before her, no longer wearing the elegant gowns of court. Instead, she was dressed for battle in form-fitting black armor that seemed to absorb the torchlight. Her platinum hair was braided back tightly, and her ice-blue eyes held nothing but cold purpose. "Finally awake, little lamb." Seraphine's voice echoed off the cavern walls. "Good. I was beginning to worry you wouldn't survive long enough to serve your purpose." Ella tested her bonds. Thick rope that bit into her wrists and ankles. "What purpose?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Bait naturally. Seraphine began pacing, her armored boots clicking against the stone floor. "You see, killing you quietly would have been effective, but not nearly dramatic enough. Lucian needs to witness your death himself, needs to feel the exact moment when his power shatters along with his heart." "You're insane." "I'm practical." Seraphine's smile was sharp as a blade. "Your stepmother's plan was elegant in its simplicity, I'll give her that. Deliver a mortal girl to our king at his most vulnerable moment. Let him fall in love, then watch as her death destroys everything he's built." She leaned closer, her breath cold against Ella's cheek. The only flaw was assuming I'd wait for natural causes. Fear clawed at Ella's chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Lucian will come for me." "Oh, I'm counting on it." Seraphine straightened and gestured to one of her followers, a scarred vampire with dead black eyes. "Deliver the message to the palace. Make sure the king understands his options." Back in the throne room of Umberleth, Lucian felt the exact moment something went wrong. The blood vow he shared with Ella created a connection between them, and suddenly, that connection blazed with fear and pain before going dangerously dim. He was on his feet before his logical mind caught up, power sparking around him like visible electricity. The air in the throne room grew thick and heavy as his control began to slip. "My lord." Lord Aldrich, one of his few truly loyal advisors, approached cautiously. "What is it?" "Ella." The name came as a growl, and Lucian's fangs extended fully for the first time in decades. "Something's happened to Ella." Before anyone could respond, the scarred vampire strode into the throne room with rude confidence. In his hands, he carried a piece of fabric that Lucian recognized immediately, torn from the dress Ella had been wearing that morning. "A message from Lady Seraphine. Your mortal queen sends her regards from her new accommodations." Lucian moved faster than human eyes could follow. One moment, he was on his throne. The next, he had the messenger lifted off his feet, claws pressed against his throat. "Where is she?" "The deep caverns." The vampire gasped out, showing no fear despite being seconds from death. "Lady Seraphine awaits your answer to her proposal. Bring your crown to exchange for the girl's life, or bring your corpse to join her in death." Lucian's roar of fury shook the very foundations of the palace. Stone dust rained from the ceiling as his power burst outward, shattering crystal formations and sending lesser vampires running for cover. "My lord." Lord Malachar stepped forward, though Ella noticed he was careful to keep his distance. "Surely you cannot be considering this madness. One mortal girl against the stability of the entire realm." "She is my queen," Lucian snarled with his silver eyes blazing with inhuman rage. "She is a weakness," Lady Evangeline protested. A mortal who will die within decades regardless. You would risk everything, our civilization, our very existence, for a creature whose lifespan is but a blink of an eye? The other council members murmured agreement, their faces showing everything from concern to barely concealed relief. Here was their chance to be rid of the human problem permanently. The girl has served her purpose, Lord Malachar continued, his tone carefully reasonable. She brought you happiness for a time, but now she threatens the realm itself. Let her go, my lord. Choose your eternal kingdom over mortal attachment. For a moment, silence filled the throne room. Lucian stood perfectly still, and those who knew him well recognized the terrible calm that came before his most destructive actions. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but carried the weight of absolute authority. You mistake me for someone who weighs lives on a scale of political convenience. Lucian is not just my queen, she is mine. The blood vow that binds us is sacred, older than your petty politics and stronger than your cowardice. He turned to face his council, and several vampires actually stepped backward at what they saw in his eyes. I have ruled for 8 centuries. I have built this realm from scattered groups into a unified nation. I have protected you, guided you, and asked for nothing but loyalty in return. His power filled the room like a living thing, making the very air difficult to breathe. But understand this, I will burn this entire kingdom to ash before I let harm come to what is mine. The declaration sent shockwaves through the assembled court. This was their immortal king choosing a mortal over his eternal subjects. She is my queen, and I will bring her home, Lucian continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more danger than any shout. If that means war with traitors who wear the mask of loyalty, so be it. If it means razing the deep cavern stone by stone, I welcome the task. He strode towards the throne room's exit, then paused and looked back at his stunned council. Any who wish to stand with their king may follow. Any who prefer to cower in shadows while their queen faces death may remain here and contemplate what loyalty truly means. As Lucian disappeared into the corridor, the throne room erupted into chaos. Some vampires declared their intention to follow their king into battle, while others whispered frantically about coups and the madness of immortal love. But in the deep caverns below, Seraphine smiled as her spies brought word of Lucian's declaration. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The vampire king was coming, blinded by rage and love, ready to walk straight into the trap that would end his reign forever. The deep cavern stretched beneath Umberleth like the roots of some ancient evil tree. Lucian moved through the twisting passages with deadly purpose, his most loyal warriors surrounding him in perfect formation. Lord Aldrich led the left group, his ancient sword shining with carved symbols. Captain Theron commanded the right, his crossbow loaded with silver-tipped bolts that could pierce vampire hearts. Behind them came 20 dozen more vampires who had chosen their king over political convenience.
And Ella, center of the space, bound to a stone chair, she appears defiant. Despite everything, Lucian's lips curved in a small smile. Even facing death, his queen refused to break. The plan was simple. Create chaos, divide their forces, and get to Ella before Seraphine could use her as a shield. What Lucian hadn't counted on was his queen taking matters into her own hands. In the cavern's center, Ella had been working at her bonds for hours. The rope was old but strong, designed to hold even supernatural strength. But Ella was still human, still small enough to slip one wrist through if she could just pop her thumb out of joint. The pain was terrible, but she bit down on her tongue to keep from crying out. Around her, Seraphine's followers prepared for battle, sharpening weapons and positioning themselves for the ambush they knew was coming. Seraphine herself stood near the cavern's main entrance, magnificent in her black armor, ice blue eyes fixed on the passage where she expected Lucian to appear. "He comes for you," she said without turning around. "I can smell his rage from here. Such devotion is touching, really. Pity it will be the death of you both." "You're wrong about him," Ella managed, still working at the rope around her wrists. "Lucian isn't weak because he loves me. He's stronger." "Love is a luxury immortals cannot afford," Seraphine replied coldly. "It makes us vulnerable, stupid, willing to sacrifice everything for fleeting mortal attachments. Your stepmother understood that. She used your own desperation against you, and now I'm using Lucian's love against him." The mention of Victoria sent fresh rage through Ella's veins. "Where is she? Victoria?" Seraphine's smile was cruel. "Oh, didn't I mention your dear stepmother is joining us for the finale? After all, she deserves to see her handiwork completed." As if summoned by her words, a commotion erupted from one of the side passages. Victoria Matthews stumbled into the cavern, her hands tied behind her back, her perfectly styled hair messy, and her expensive dress torn. Behind her walked two of Seraphine's vampires, clearly serving as guards. "What is this?" Victoria demanded, her voice high-pitched with panic. "This wasn't part of our agreement. You promised the girl would simply disappear." "Plans change," Seraphine said with amusement. "I decided you should witness the fruits of your betrayal firsthand. After all, you did deliver her to us so perfectly." Victoria's eyes found Ella across the cavern, and for a moment, something almost like guilt flickered across her face. Then her expression hardened back into familiar cruelty. "She was always a burden," Victoria said, lifting her chin stubbornly. "Her father's mistake that I've been cleaning up for years. If her death serves a purpose, at least she'll finally be useful." The words hit Ella like physical blows, but they also made her determined. With one final agonizing effort, she popped her thumb out of joint and pulled her hand free from the rope. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the cavern, steel boots against stone. The whisper of weapons being drawn. Lucian was here. "Positions," Seraphine commanded, and her followers melted into the shadows like liquid darkness. Lucian appeared at the mouth of the cavern like an avenging angel carved from shadow and starlight. His silver eyes found Ella immediately, and she saw the terrible relief that flooded his features when he confirmed she was alive. "Let her go, Seraphine," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of 8 centuries of absolute authority. "This is between us." "Oh, but she's the whole point," Seraphine laughed, drawing her own blade, a curved sword that gleamed with strange evil. "But without your mortal weakness to exploit, you're just another vampire king. But with her," she gestured toward Ella, "with her, you're vulnerable, breakable." The battle erupted without warning. Seraphine's hidden vampires poured from the shadows, meeting Lucian's warriors in a clash of steel and supernatural fury. The cavern filled with the sounds of combat. The ring of blade against blade, the inhuman snarls of vampires pushed beyond reason, the wet sounds of fangs finding flesh. Lucian cut through his enemies like a force of nature, every movement precise and deadly, but Seraphine was waiting for him, and when they finally met in single combat, the very air seemed to catch fire from the violence of their clash. It was then that Ella made her move. While the two ancient vampires fought with speed and fury that blurred the eye, Ella slipped from her bonds completely and crept toward where Seraphine had left her personal belongings. Among them was a silver dagger, fancy but wickedly sharp. Seraphine was magnificent in battle, her movements like deadly poetry, but she was so focused on Lucian that she didn't notice the mortal creeping up behind her. "You always were too sentimental," Seraphine taunted as her blade locked against Lucian's. "It will be your downfall, just as it was always meant to be." The silver dagger slid between her ribs from behind, piercing her heart with perfect aim. Seraphine's eyes went wide with shock and pain as her supernatural strength began to drain away. "That's for my father," Ella whispered in her ear, "and for every lie you told." Lucian didn't waste the opportunity.
With Seraphine weakened and distracted, his sword found her throat in one swift, final stroke. As Seraphine's body crumbled to ash, her dying words echoed through the cavern. "You'll regret choosing love over power, Lucien. Mark my words. You'll regret it." The battle was over. Around them, Seraphine's followers lay defeated or had fled into the deeper tunnels. Victoria cowered against the cavern wall, her face pale with terror as she finally understood the true nature of the forces she tried to control. Lucien pulled Ella into his arms, and she melted against him, finally safe. "It's over," he murmured against her hair. But as they held each other in the flickering torchlight, surrounded by the aftermath of betrayal and war, Ella couldn't shake the feeling that Seraphine's final words carried the weight of a prediction. Time would tell if love was truly stronger than power, or if they'd won this battle only to lose a larger war. The great throne room of Umberleth had never seen such a gathering. Every vampire lord and lady in the realm stood in perfect formation along the marble floors, their pale faces reflecting the light of 1,000 crystals. At the center of it all, 2 thrones waited, one of black stone that seemed to eat light, the other of white marble that pulsed with its own inner radiance. But it was the woman standing beside the black throne that commanded every eye in the room. Ellen no longer looked like the terrified girl who had stumbled through the forest mere weeks ago. She wore a gown of deep crimson that seemed to flow like liquid fire, her reddish-brown hair crowned with a small silver crown and moonstone that caught the light like captured starshine. But it was her attitude that had truly transformed, standing straight and royal with silver eyes that met the stares of immortal predators without flinching. The blood vow had changed her in ways that went beyond just her body. She could sense the currents of power that flowed through the room, could smell the fear and reluctant respect that came from vampires who had once dismissed her as prey. "Lords and ladies of Umberleth," Lucien's voice carried easily through the vast space. "You have witnessed much in recent days: betrayal, war, the price of divided loyalties. Today you will witness something far more important: the coronation of your true queen." A ripple of tension moved through the crowd, but no one dared speak. The battle in the deep caverns had broken the back of the resistance. Those who had supported Seraphine were either dead or had fled into exile. Those who remained understood that the time for fighting had passed. Lucien lifted an ornate crown from a velvet cushion, white gold crafted with gems that seemed to hold trapped starshine. It was ancient, crafted in the early days of the realm for queens who had never existed. Until now. Ella Matthews, do you swear to protect this realm and its people, to rule with wisdom and strength, to be both sword and shield for those who call you sovereign? Ella's voice carried clearly through the throne room. "I do so swear." "Do you swear to stand as my equal, to share both the burden and the glory of the crown, to be my partner in all things until the stars burn out and darkness claims the world?" "I do so swear." The crown settled on her head with surprising weight, but Ella didn't falter. Power flowed through the ancient metal, connecting her not just to Lucien, but to the very foundations of the realm itself. She could feel every vampire in the kingdom, sense the pulse of life in the world above, and understand the delicate balance that kept both realms in harmony. "Behold," Lucien's voice rang out like a bell. "Queen Ella Nightborn, sovereign of Umberleth, protector of the blood realms." The court knelt as one, some reluctantly, others with genuine respect, but all acknowledging what could no longer be denied. The mortal girl had become something more, something worthy of the crown she wore. As the formal ceremony concluded, Ella's attention was drawn to a figure cowering near the great doors. Victoria Matthews looked nothing like the proud woman who had once terrorized Ella's every waking moment. Her perfectly styled hair was dirty and torn, her perfectly styled hair hanging in long strands around her worn face. Ella approached her stepmother with measured steps, and Victoria fell to her knees. "Please," Victoria whispered, her voice breaking, "I didn't know. I never meant it for it to go so far." "You sold me," Ella said quietly, her new authority making even whispered words carry weight. "You sold me to creatures you thought would kill me, all for gold and social position. I was desperate, the debts, the shame. The same desperation you showed me no mercy for." Ella leaned closer, and Victoria flinched.
Ella's voice remained calm, but steel ran beneath the silk. You wanted to see me serve others for the rest of my life. Very well. You will remain in Umberleth as a servant. You will tend the gardens you once had others maintain for you. You will clean and cook and scrub floors, and you will do it surrounded by the vampires you thought to manipulate. Ella leaned closer, and Victoria flinched away. And every day, you will remember that the girl you tried to destroy became the queen who spared your worthless life. Victoria was led away by silent guards, and Ella felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The past was finally truly buried. Hours later, as the celebration continued in the halls below, Ella stood with Lucian on the private balcony of their chambers. The view showed not sky, but the impossible beauty of Umberleth stretching into crystal-lit distance, a realm that was now as much hers as his. Any regrets? Lucian asked, his arm wrapped around her waist. Ella leaned into his embrace, marveling at how perfectly they fit together. About which part? Running into the forest? Marrying a vampire king? Becoming queen of an underground realm I didn't know existed? All of it. She turned in his arms to face him fully. The frightened girl who had fled Victoria's house was gone, replaced by someone who had discovered her own strength in the fire of hardship. Someone who had learned that love wasn't weakness. It was the foundation upon which great powers could be built. No regrets, she said firmly. We chose each other in that forest, Lucian. Everything else, the crowns, the power, the politics, those are just details. What matters is this. She placed her hand over his heart, feeling the slow, steady rhythm beneath her palm. What we built together. He kissed her then, soft and sure, and in that kiss was the promise of centuries yet to come. When they broke apart, Ella looked out over their realm with eyes that blazed silver in the crystal light. She was no longer the girl who had run into the forest seeking escape. She was Queen Ella Nightborn, sovereign of shadows and light, protector of both human and immortal worlds, and she was exactly where she belonged.